The sand was red where Lieutenant Marcus Vale lay dying. Not metaphorically red, not sunset red, actual red, soaked through with blood that pooled beneath his shattered leg and spread like spilled paint across the Afghan valley floor. He'd stopped screaming an hour ago. Now he just breathed, shallow and mechanical, watching the sky turn from blue to purple to something darker. His radio crackled with static and distant voices calling his name, but he couldn't reach it anymore. The IED had thrown him 15 meters from his Humvee, and the Taliban fighters who'd triggered it were somewhere in the ridgeline above, waiting to see if anyone would come for the bait. 3 other vehicles in his convoy had already pulled back after the ambush turned into a killing field. Standard procedure. You don't trade more lives for one. Marcus understood that. He'd have made the same call. So he lay there in the cooling desert air, watching the first stars appear, and tried to remember a prayer his mother had taught him before he could even read. The words wouldn't come. Only the sky remained, indifferent and vast, and the creeping cold that started in his fingers and moved inward like a tide. He thought about his daughter's birthday next week. He thought about the mortgage payment that would bounce. He thought about nothing at all. Then he heard it, a sound like God tearing canvas, low and guttural and impossibly close. His eyes snapped open. The A-10 Thunderbolt II came in so low he could see the panel gaps in its titanium belly, could count the empty pylons where Maverick missiles had hung that morning. Smoke trailed from its left engine cowling in a black ribbon, and part of its vertical stabilizer was simply gone, sheared away by what must have been a catastrophic hit. The aircraft was dying too, but it wasn't running. It was hunting. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon erupted with a sound that wasn't quite sound, more like reality splitting open. 30mm rounds chewed through the ridgeline at 70 rounds per second, turning rock faces into dust clouds and firing positions into memory. Marcus felt the concussive waves in his chest, felt his broken body shudder with each burst. The A-10 banked hard right, trailing more smoke, and he saw the pilot's helmet silhouette in the cockpit. Small. Compact. Wrong somehow for the brutality of what he was watching. The radio in the dirt 3 meters away suddenly crackled to life. A voice, female, controlled with the kind of calm that only comes from someone who's already made peace with whatever's coming next. Havoc 2-1, this is Reaper 1-6. I have visual on your position. Stay down, I'm not finished. The A-10 came around again, lower this time, impossibly low, its damaged airframe shuddering with each maneuver. Marcus could see hydraulic fluid misting from somewhere beneath the wing root, could see the way the aircraft yawed slightly to compensate for the missing stabilizer. It should have ejected 10 minutes ago, should have punched out over friendly territory and let the $50 million machine become a crater. Instead, it flew lazy, deliberate circles over his position, daring anything with a weapon to show itself. The Taliban obliged. Muzzle flashes sparked from a dried creek bed 400 meters east, and the A-10's nose dipped like a predator catching a scent. The gun spoke again, briefer this time, surgical. The muzzle flashes stopped. Havoc 2-1, dust off inbound your position, 3 minutes. I'm going to make some noise up here to keep heads down. Do not, I say again, do not try to move. Let them come to you. Marcus tried to respond, but only managed a wet cough that tasted like copper. His vision tunneled and expanded in waves. The A-10 climbed slightly, trailing that black smoke ribbon, and he realized with sudden clarity that the pilot couldn't have much fuel left, couldn't have much time. Every second she stayed was a second closer to going down in the same valley, becoming the same kind of bait. The radio crackled again. 2-1, I need you to do something for me. I need you to stay angry, stay awake. Whatever you're thinking about right now, your family, going home, giving up, put it aside. Just be angry that you're in this dirt. Be angry at me for the noise. Be angry at anything. Anger keeps you sharp. Sharp keeps you breathing. There was a pause, filled only with the groan of damaged turbofans. And I didn't fly through hell to watch you quit on me now. Something in Marcus's chest unclenched. He focused on his hand, forced his fingers to curl into the sand, forced himself to feel the pain instead of floating above it. In the distance, he heard the blessed thump of rotor blades. The Blackhawk came in fast and steep, flaring hard in a brownout landing that sent dust exploding across the valley floor. Marcus watched through slitted eyes as crew chiefs in flight suits and body armor jumped down before the wheels fully settled, already running with a litter between them. Above them, the A-10 made another pass, higher now, conserving what had to be fumes in the tank. The gun stayed silent this time. Just presence. Just the promise of violence if anyone interrupted the extraction. The medics reached Marcus in seconds, hands already assessing, voices calling out vitals and injuries in the efficient shorthand of combat medicine. An IV went into his arm. Pressure bandages appeared on his leg with practiced speed that meant he wasn't the first shredded soldier they put back together. "Stay with us, Lieutenant," one of them said, a kid who looked barely old enough to vote. "We're going home." They lifted him onto the litter, and the movement sent a fresh wave of agony through his body that made his vision white out. When it cleared, they were already running back to the Black Hawk, the rotors whipping dust into horizontal streamers. Marcus craned his neck, searching the sky. The A-10 was banking north, climbing slowly, still trailing that black smoke like a funeral banner. It cleared the ridgeline by maybe 200 feet, disappearing into the dusk. He never saw it again. Inside the Black Hawk, with the crew chief yelling into his helmet mic and the medic working on his leg with concentrated fury, Marcus found his voice. "The pilot," he rasped. "The A-10, who was that?" The crew chief glanced at him, then back toward the valley falling away beneath them. His expression was complicated respect mixed with something else. Discomfort, maybe. "Reaper 16, he shouted over the rotor noise. "Captain Nix Cowery, she's got a reputation." Marcus wanted to ask what kind of reputation, but his body finally, mercifully, decided it had endured enough. The darkness he'd been fighting for the past hour rolled over him like a wave, and this time he let it take him. His last conscious thought was the sound of that cannon firing, and the calm voice promising she wasn't finished. Marcus Vale woke up 3 days later in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, his leg saved but rebuilt with enough titanium to set off metal detectors for the rest of his life. The doctors told him he'd been lucky. The Taliban told him through intelligence channels that they'd lost 14 fighters in that valley. His command told him he'd be going home with a Purple Heart and a medical discharge. But nobody told him much about Captain Nix Cowery except that she'd made it back to base on one engine and fumes, landing the crippled A-10 with 10 minutes of fuel remaining and a hydraulic system held together by prayers and duct tape. When he asked the nurses, they exchanged looks. When he asked the doctors, they changed the subject. When he asked his former platoon sergeant during a video call, the man just shook his head. "Look, Vale, you're alive because she's either the best pilot in the Air Force or the craziest. Maybe both. But she's not someone command likes to talk about. Just let it go." Marcus didn't let it go. He spent his recovery obsessively searching for information, piecing together a picture from fragments and rumors. Captain Nix Cowery, call sign Reaper 16, 28 years old, Lebanese-American, graduate of the Air Force Academy where she'd ranked in the top 5% of her class. She'd been flying A-10s for 4 years, with 3 deployments and a kill count that would have been impressive for a squadron, let alone a single pilot. But the more Marcus dug, the more he found the pattern, the uncomfortable silences, the way her name came up in after-action reports but rarely in commendations, the mission success rate that was extraordinary paired with a reputation that was complicated. "She's aggressive," one online forum post from an anonymous Air Force officer read. "Takes risks that would get anyone else grounded, but somehow she always brings it home." Another comment from what claimed to be a former wingman: "Cowery doesn't fly for glory, she flies angry. Difference is important." Marcus lay in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles, and tried to reconcile these fragments with the voice that had kept him conscious. The calm, almost gentle tone that had told him to stay angry, to keep breathing. He didn't understand it yet. 6 months later, Marcus was stateside, learning to walk again with a prosthetic that his VA physical therapist promised would feel natural eventually. It didn't. Nothing felt natural. His daughter barely recognized him when he came home, and his wife moved through the house like she was navigating around a stranger. He'd survived the valley, but some essential part of him had stayed there in the red sand, and he didn't know how to get it back. The nightmares came every night. Not of the explosion or the pain, but of the waiting. The terrible, quiet waiting to die while the sky turned dark. He'd wake up choking, reaching for a radio that wasn't there, hearing that cannon fire echoing in his head. On a Tuesday in October, he drove to the Air Force base where he'd been told Cowery's squadron was stationed. He didn't have a plan, didn't have an appointment. He just needed to see the person behind the voice, to thank her, to understand why she'd stayed when every regulation and instinct said to leave. The guard at the gate checked his ID, made a phone call, and waved him through with an expression that was carefully neutral. Marcus parked outside the squadron building, a nondescript gray structure that looked like every other building on base, and sat in his truck for 20 minutes before he found the courage to go inside. The squadron operations room was organized chaos pilots in flight suits studying mission maps, crew chiefs arguing about maintenance schedules, the smell of coffee and jet fuel and stress. Marcus stood in the doorway, suddenly aware of how civilian he looked now, how out of place. A major noticed him first, breaking away from a conversation to approach with the polite wariness of someone dealing with an unknown variable. "Help you with something." Marcus straightened despite the protest from his rebuilt leg. "Yes, sir. I'm looking for Captain Cowery. I'm Lieutenant Vale." "Was Lieutenant Vale?" "I know who you are," the major interrupted, and his expression shifted to something Marcus couldn't quite read. Not hostility, but not welcome either. "You're the Havoc 2-1 extraction." "Yes, sir. I just wanted to." "She's not here." "When will she be back?" "I can wait." The major glanced toward the hallway, then back. "She's not here because she's not flying." Something cold settled in Marcus's stomach. "What do you mean?" The major sighed, the sound of a man who'd had this conversation too many times and never enjoyed it. He gestured toward his office, a small room with Venetian blinds and walls covered in aerial photos and deployment maps. Marcus followed, his prosthetic clicking slightly with each step. Inside, the major closed the door and leaned against his desk. "Captain Cowery has been grounded pending an investigation into her conduct during your rescue operation," he said flatly. "The damage to her aircraft exceeded acceptable risk parameters. She was ordered to RTB return to base after taking that first hit. Instead, she stayed on station for another 17 minutes, engaged multiple targets with a compromised airframe, and landed with critical systems failures that could have resulted in loss of aircraft and pilot." Marcus stared at him. "She saved my life. She also violated direct orders, endangered a $40 million asset, and set a precedent that command finds deeply concerning." The major's voice was careful, diplomatic. "Look, Vale, I understand you're grateful. Anyone would be. But this isn't the first time Cowery's pushed beyond her brief. It's a pattern of behavior that suggests poor judgment and lack of discipline." "Poor judgment," Marcus repeated, and he heard his voice rising despite himself. "I was bleeding out in a kill zone. Taliban in the ridges. No way to extract until someone cleared the area." "She cleared the area." "There were other assets that could have. There weren't. I was listening on the radio before I blacked out. Nearest Apache was 20 minutes out. Fast movers couldn't get low enough in that terrain. It was her or nobody." Marcus felt his hands shaking. "And if she'd followed orders and left, I'd be in a cave somewhere right now on video, waiting for them to cut my head off." The major's expression didn't change. "That's not how command sees it." "Then command is wrong." Silence filled the small office, broken only by the distant sound of a jet engine spinning up on the flight line. The major studied Marcus with something that might have been sympathy. "Off the record, you're not wrong. Cowery's save rate is extraordinary. Guys like you, guys who should be dead, walking around because she refused to leave. But she does it by breaking every rule we have about acceptable risk." He pulled a file from his desk drawer, opened it without looking at the contents. 3 years ago, she stayed on station over a downed Chinook crew despite taking ground fire that destroyed her right engine. Landed on one engine at Bagram with a fire in the wheel well. Last year, she expended every round she had covering a SEAL team extraction, then used her aircraft as a battering ram. Literally flew at a technical position to scatter them with jet wash because she had nothing left to shoot. Got written up for both. Marcus felt something click into place. The pattern you mentioned, it's not poor judgment, it's a choice. A choice that's going to get her killed, the major said quietly, or court-martialed. Right now it's 50-50 which comes first. He closed the file. There's a hearing in 2 weeks. Board of Inquiry. They'll review her conduct, her service record, and make a determination about her future in the Air Force. If you want to help her, you can submit a statement. It won't change the outcome, but it'll be on record. Marcus took the paper the major slid across the desk. A witness statement form, official and impersonal. Where is she now? That's not something I can please. The major hesitated, then wrote an address on a post-it note and handed it over without a word. Marcus left the building with the address folded in his pocket and a growing anger that felt clean and focused for the first time since the explosion. Not anger at the Taliban or the war or his broken body, but at a system that would ground someone for refusing to let people die. The address led him to a small apartment complex off base, the kind of generic military housing where everyone was either deploying, returning, or waiting. He found the right unit number and knocked, then waited in the afternoon heat, suddenly uncertain what he'd even say. The woman who opened the door was not what he expected. Not because of her appearance. She was compact and athletic, dark hair pulled back, eyes that were almost black in the shadow of the doorway, but because of how ordinary she looked. No flight suit, no warrior bearing. She wore civilian clothes and held a coffee mug, and she looked at him with the tired patience of someone who'd been interrupted during rare peace. Captain Cowery, Marcus asked, though he already knew. Something about her presence matched the voice he'd memorized. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze moving from his face to his stance, lingering briefly on his left leg. Recognition flickered across her features. Havoc 2-1, she said, and it wasn't a question. You're up and walking, that's good. Thanks to you, Marcus said, and the words felt inadequate, childish. I wanted to thank you, I needed to thank you. Cowery's expression didn't change. You already thanked me, everyone thanks me. Then they go back to their lives and I go back to mine and the math works out. She started to close the door. Marcus put his hand against it, gentle but firm. I heard you're grounded, that they're investigating you for the rescue. Not for the rescue, she corrected. For the methods, there's a difference, apparently. Her voice carried a bitter edge. And yes, I'm grounded. So if you came here looking for some kind of hero, I came here because I don't understand why you stayed, Marcus interrupted. Every pilot I talked to said you should have left. That staying was suicide, but you stayed anyway and I need to know why. Cowery looked at him for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. You want to know why, come in. But I'm warning you, Lieutenant, the answer's not going to make you feel better. The apartment was sparse, almost military in its efficiency. A couch, a coffee table covered in aviation manuals and maintenance reports, walls bare except for a single framed photograph of an A-10 in flight. No personal effects, no decorations. It looked like a place someone lived but didn't inhabit. Cowery gestured to the couch and remained standing, leaning against the kitchen counter with her arms crossed. You know what they call me in the squadron, she asked. Reaper. That's your call sign. That's what they put on the roster. But you know what they call me when they think I can't hear? The martyr. Saint Nick's. The pilot with a death wish who's going to get someone killed trying to save everyone. Marcus settled onto the couch, his prosthetic legs stretched out awkwardly. Are they right? About the death wish? No, I don't want to die, Lieutenant. I just understand something most pilots don't. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Every time I strap into that cockpit, I accept that I might not come back. That's the job. But if I'm going to take that risk, it's going to be for something that matters. Not for dropping bombs on empty buildings or flying combat air patrol over nothing. For lives, for people who are out of options. That's not a death wish, Marcus said. That's purpose. Command disagrees. They want pilots who follow orders, who calculate acceptable losses, who understand that one aircraft and one pilot aren't worth risking for one soldier. Her voice was steady, clinical. They're not wrong from a strategic standpoint. I'm violating doctrine every time I stay past bingo fuel or push a damaged aircraft past safety limits. By their metrics, I'm dangerous. By my metrics, you're the reason I got to meet my daughter again. Cowrie's expression softened slightly, the first crack in her controlled demeanor. How old is she? 7, turned 8 while I was in Germany. He pulled out his phone, showed her a photo of his daughter on her birthday, chocolate cake smeared on her face, grinning at the camera. She made me promise I'd teach her to ride a bike without training wheels. I almost didn't get to keep that promise. Cowrie looked at the photo for a long moment, then away. I'm glad you did. Genuinely, but that doesn't change what's coming. The board's going to recommend discipline, probably grounding me permanently, maybe kicking me out entirely. And honestly, she met his eyes. Part of me is relieved. Every mission I have to decide how far I'm willing to push, how much risk is acceptable. It's exhausting. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong up there anymore. Marcus felt anger rising again, that clean, focused heat. You know that's bullshit. You belong up there more than anyone. Do I? Or do I just have survivor's guilt that won't let me make rational decisions? She set her coffee mug down hard enough to splash. You want the real story, Lieutenant. The reason I fly angry. Cowrie moved to the window, staring out at the parking lot and the base beyond. Her reflection in the glass looked haunted. 4 years ago, I was co-piloting a Black Hawk in Iraq. Not an A-10. Different life. We got a call for emergency extraction squad pinned down in Ramadi, taking fire, 1 critical casualty. Standard stuff. We came in fast, and my pilot, Captain Sarah Mitchell, put that helicopter down in a hot LZ like she was parking at the grocery store. She paused, her hands gripping the windowsill. The infantry loaded their wounded. Kid named Rodriguez, maybe 19, sucking chest wound. We lifted off under fire, took 3 hits in the tail rotor. Sarah kept us flying. Nursed that broken bird back toward base, talking calm on the radio the whole time, telling the medics in back exactly what to do for Rodriguez. She was the best pilot I ever knew. Marcus didn't interrupt. He understood where this was going, understood the weight of that past tense. We almost made it. 2 miles from base, the tail rotor assembly failed completely. We started spinning, losing altitude. Sarah had maybe 5 seconds to make a choice. We were over civilian buildings, houses, schools. If she tried to fight it, we'd have spun into someone's home. So she didn't fight. She found the only clear ground, an empty lot between neighborhoods, and augured us in. Cowrie's voice remained steady, but Marcus saw her hands tight. The crew survived. Rodriguez survived. The medics survived. I survived with a concussion and a broken collarbone. Captain Sarah Mitchell died on impact because she stayed at the controls instead of ejecting, making sure we hit exactly where she wanted. She was 29, had a fiancé waiting at base, had a whole life waiting. The silence stretched. I'm sorry, Marcus said finally, knowing it was inadequate. Don't be angry. Cowrie turned from the window, and her eyes were fierce. After that, I transferred to A-10s, close air support. The mission where you protect people on the ground, where every second you stay might be the difference between someone going home or going in a bag. And I swore I'd never leave anyone behind if I had any choice at all. Sarah didn't have a choice. The aircraft failed, but most times we do have choices. We can follow the safe regulations and preserve the asset, or we can push past them and save the life. Command wants the first option. I can't stop choosing the second. She crossed her arms again, defensive. So yes, I'm the martyr, Saint Nick's, the pilot who can't let go of her dead friend and projects that guilt onto every ground unit that calls for help. The psychiatrist they made me see wrote all that in his report. Maybe he's right. Marcus stood, his rebuilt leg protesting. You know what I think? I think Sarah Mitchell made a choice that saved everyone except herself. And I think she'd be proud as hell that you learned from it, that you keep making the same choice over and over no matter what it costs you. It's going to cost me my wings, Cowrie said quietly. Maybe, but how many people are alive right now because you had them? He gestured toward the window, toward the base, toward the wider world. How many parents still have kids? How many kids still have parents? You know the number, don't you? Cowrie didn't answer, but something in her posture confirmed it. I know mine, Marcus said. 1 me. I'm alive because you looked at the regulations and the risk and the acceptable losses and you said no. That's not a death wish. That's courage. And if command can't see the difference, they're blind. He pulled out the witness statement form the major had given him. There's a hearing in 2 weeks. I'm going to submit this. I'm going to tell them exactly what you did and why it mattered. But I need to know if they clear you, if they let you keep flying, will you stop? Will you start following the safe protocols? Cowrie looked at him, and for the first time she smiled. It was small and sad and absolutely genuine. No, I won't. Because there's going to be another valley, another soldier, another moment where someone needs the choice that Sarah made. And I'd rather die making it than live knowing I flew away. Then I'll tell them that too, Marcus said. Let them decide if they want pilots who are safe or pilots who are righteous. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Cowrie said. They should be able to be both. Should be, but in war we don't get should be, we get what is. Marcus extended his hand. What is that I'm standing here having this conversation because you were righteous. Thank you, Captain, for everything. Cowrie shook his hand, her grip firm. Stay angry, Lieutenant, it looks good on you. After Marcus left, Cowrie stood in her empty apartment for a long time, staring at the witness statement form he'd left on her coffee table. She thought about Sarah Mitchell, who died making sure everyone else lived. She thought about the board of inquiry waiting in 2 weeks, the career that hung in the balance. She thought about the valley where Marcus Vale had waited to die, and the dozens of other valleys, other rooftops, other desperate positions where someone had needed her to stay just a little longer. Then she pulled out her laptop and began writing her own statement for the hearing. Not a defense or an apology, but a manifesto. If they were going to ground her, they'd do it knowing exactly why she flew the way she did. The words came easily, angry and precise and true. Outside her window, the sun set over the flight line, casting the rows of A-10s in orange and gold. Somewhere in the world, another soldier was calling for help. Another pilot was calculating acceptable risk. Another moment was arriving where someone would have to choose between the regulations and the right thing. Cowrie wrote until the light faded and the words ran out. Then she saved the document and closed the laptop. In 2 weeks, they'd decide her fate. Until then, she'd wait, grounded but not broken, ready to fight for the right to keep fighting. The apartment was silent except for the distant rumble of jets taking off, heading toward someone's war. She listened to them climb into the darkening sky and wondered if they'd stay when they were needed, or if they'd calculate the risk and leave. She wondered if anyone else would choose what Sarah had chosen, what she kept choosing over and over despite the cost. In the darkness of her apartment, Captain Nix Cowrie smiled grimly and thought, stay angry. It keeps you sharp. Sharp keeps you flying. And flying keeps them alive. That was the only math that mattered. The Board of Inquiry convened on a Tuesday morning in a conference room that smelled like floor polish and recycled air. 5 senior officers sat behind a long table, their uniforms immaculate, their expressions carefully neutral. Captain Nix Cowrie stood at attention before them in her dress blues, every ribbon and badge aligned with regulation precision, looking small and alone in the formal space. The proceedings had the sterile quality of military justice, methodical, dispassionate, concerned with doctrine rather than desperation. The presiding colonel, a career officer named Hendricks with 3 decades of service and eyes like flint, read the charges with bureaucratic efficiency. Violation of direct orders during combat operations, reckless endangerment of government property, a pattern of aggressive behavior inconsistent with Air Force standards. Each phrase was carefully chosen to transform her choices into crimes. Cowrie stood silent through the reading, her face impassive, channeling every lesson she'd learned about bearing under pressure. The colonel set down his papers. Captain Cowrie, you've submitted a written statement, but this board needs to hear directly from you. Why did you remain on station after taking damage that warranted immediate return to base? Cowrie took a breath, meeting his gaze. Because there was a man bleeding out in a kill zone, sir, and no other asset available to protect his extraction. Leaving would have been tactically sound and morally unacceptable. Morally unacceptable, Hendricks repeated, as if tasting the words. Captain, we don't make tactical decisions based on morality. We make them based on doctrine, training, and strategic value. One soldier, however tragic his situation, does not justify risking a pilot and a $40 million aircraft. With respect, sir, That's exactly the kind of calculation that loses wars. We can win every tactical engagement and still fail strategically if our people on the ground don't trust that we'll stay when they need us. A lieutenant colonel to Hendrix's left, a woman named Tors with an attack helicopter background, leaned forward. "Captain, your service record shows exceptional skill. Your kill count and mission success rate are among the highest in the Air Force. But this isn't the first time you've pushed beyond acceptable parameters. Can you explain the pattern?" This was the crux of it, Cowery knew. "Yes, ma'am. Every instance involved a choice between following protocol and saving lives. I chose lives. I'd make the same choices again." Tor's expression remained neutral, even knowing it might end your career, especially knowing that. Cowery's voice was steady. "Because if the price of my career is that soldiers like Lieutenant Vale come home to their families, that's not a price, that's a bargain." Hendricks shuffled papers, pulled out a specific report. "Let's discuss the Bagram incident. 3 years ago, you stayed on station with a destroyed engine, providing cover for a downed Chinook crew. You were ordered to egress. You refused and continued engaging targets for 12 minutes before RTB. That aircraft was later deemed unrepairable. You cost the Air Force $38 million because you wouldn't follow orders." "I cost the Air Force an aircraft, sir. I saved the Air Force 8 crew members and a helicopter pilot who went on to train the next generation of aviators. If we're calculating value, I think I came out ahead." A ripple of something passed through the board, not quite approval but acknowledgement. Hendricks pressed on. "And last year's SEAL team extraction. You expended all ammunition, then used your aircraft to scatter enemy forces with jet wash. That's not a recognized combat technique. That's improvisation that could have resulted in a crash. It was also the only option available at the time, sir. The SEALs were surrounded, wounded out of ammunition. I had altitude, speed, and an aircraft capable of generating enough wind to disrupt the enemy formation. It worked." "By luck," Hendricks said. "By skill and calculated risk," Cowery corrected. "I knew my aircraft's capabilities. I knew the terrain. I made a judgment call in real time with incomplete information, which is what we train pilots to do." Tors interjected. "But you consistently make the aggressive call, Captain. Every time you face this choice, you escalate rather than disengage. That suggests a pattern that goes beyond tactical judgment. It suggests a personal imperative that might compromise your decision-making." Here it was, the real question beneath all the others. Cowery met Tor's gaze and decided on truth. "You're asking if I have a death wish. I don't. You're asking if I'm reckless. I'm not. What I am is unwilling to let people die when I have the means to prevent it. Every pilot makes that calculation differently. Some value their own survival above all else. Some value the mission. Some value the asset. I value the lives I'm tasked to protect, and I'm willing to risk everything else to preserve them." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Before I flew A-10s, I was a Black Hawk co-pilot. My pilot, Captain Sarah Mitchell, died keeping our damaged aircraft from crashing into civilian homes. She could have ejected. She could have saved herself. She chose to stay at the controls and die so that we, her crew, her passengers, the people in those homes, could live. I learned from her that the highest calling of a military pilot isn't self-preservation or following doctrine. It's making the choice that protects others, whatever that costs." The room fell silent. Hendricks and Tors exchanged a look that was impossible to read. Then Hendricks set down his pen. "Captain, this board understands the emotional weight of what you witnessed, but we cannot allow individual trauma, however valid, to dictate operational doctrine. If every pilot made decisions based on personal moral imperatives rather than tactical doctrine, we'd have chaos in the air. We'd have pilots taking unnecessary risks, dying needlessly, leaving their wingmen to carry guilt they don't deserve." He leaned back, his voice softening slightly. "I knew Sarah Mitchell. She was one of the finest pilots I ever served with. Her death was a tragedy, but using her sacrifice to justify your own pattern of risky behavior doesn't honor her memory, it compounds the tragedy." Cowery felt something hot and sharp in her chest. "With respect, sir, you didn't sit in that cockpit next to her. You didn't watch her choose death to save everyone else." And you don't carry the weight of knowing that her last words to me were, "Make it mean something." I've spent 4 years trying to make it mean something. If that's what you call trauma-driven decision-making, fine. But it's also saved 37 lives by my count. 37 people who went home because I stayed when doctrine said to leave. The number hung in the air like a challenge. 37. A major at the far end of the table, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "Captain, we've received several witness statements regarding your conduct. Would you like them entered into the record?" "Yes, sir." The major began reading, and Cowery recognized Marcus Vale's words first. A detailed account of the valley, the waiting, the A-10 that appeared like a guardian angel through the smoke. The voice that told him to stay angry, stay breathing. The refusal to leave until extraction was complete. Then more statements. A ranger who'd been pinned down in a building collapse, watching Cowery's A-10 make gun runs so close to friendly positions that he could see the pilot's face. A convoy commander who'd lost his vehicle to an RPG and watched Cowery orbit his position for 40 minutes, well past bingo fuel, until QRF arrived. A combat controller who'd called in close air support and gotten Cowery at the end of her sortie, low on ammunition, who still stayed and made 3 more passes with her nearly empty cannon to break an ambush. The accounts piled up, each one a variation on the same theme. She stayed when others left. She pushed when others pulled back. She made the hard choice look easy because she'd made peace with the consequences. By the time the major finished reading, Cowery felt exposed, every scar and decision laid bare. But she stood steady, refusing to show weakness. Hendricks studied her for a long moment, then glanced at his fellow board members. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind of wordless understanding that comes from decades of shared service. He turned back to